everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect. So on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. The webinar will begin shortly. It will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. Okay, once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will be dedicating the last portion of the conversation to respond to the questions you post.
Hey, Sarah, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 sec. Everyone is saying that the chat box is disabled.
Oh, I will go ahead and take care of that right now.
Sorry.
No, all good. It should be available for everyone now. Sorry about that, everyone. Additionally, I did want to say that this webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook, and a link to the recording, as well as any resources that you see shared in the chat box, will be made available on Friday. And finally, we'll be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Also, before we start, I'd like to call your attention to our upcoming learning and engagement opportunities. After being offline in August and sharing a series of rebroadcasts, we are so excited to be launching our robust September lineup of live sessions. Next week on September 13th, we resume our double headers with a Crucible of Practice Salon at 12:30 Eastern Time, focused on one community's approach to trauma-informed practice, followed by a GLR Learning Tuesday session at 3 p.m. that will take a deep dive into the science of reading, which has recently gotten much media attention. On September 20th, we again have an exciting doubleheader with a Funder to Funder conversation at 12:30, co-sponsored with the Overdeck Family Foundation, focused on an important issue also prominent in the news recently, re-envisioning school staffing. And finally, at 3 p.m. that day, our GLR Learning Tuesday session will revisit a topic that we have discussed before and explore in a new way, parent-teacher home visits. We'll be sure to add a link in the chat box for more information and registration for these upcoming sessions, and we hope you can join us. Joining you now is Emily Samos, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra, and hello, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us today for our GLR Learning Tuesdays. We're so excited to be live again. And today's session is titled 250,000 Caring Adults, Rolling Out a New National Effort. And so now here we are 6 days into September already with Labor Day behind us, and most, if not all, children are back in the classroom. And while it's exciting and relieving to feel somewhat back to normal this school year, recent headlines have been nothing short of heartbreaking, with the NAEP scores revealing just how badly school disruptions over the past 2+ years have affected children's learning. In fact, the New York Times said the pandemic erased 2 decades of progress in math and reading. So the question now is, how do we make the best use of time and resources, both in school and out of school, to accelerate equitable learning recovery? And through its work with its partners over the past 2 years, CGLR has identified 4 big bets, and these are smart investments to help inform and accelerate equitable learning recovery in the coming months and years. So before we dive in today's webinar, we wanted to just do like a quick pulse check with all of you to see what you think and where you are on these approaches. So we're going to post a short poll and ask you to select the big bets that you agree are a smart investment. And if you have any suggestions for additional big bets, please post those in the chat. So please go ahead and check all of the ones that you think are important big bets to accelerate equitable learning recovery. And again, anything that's not on this poll, please post in the chat. We'll just take another minute or so for everybody to kind of respond to that. Thank you for your responses. All right, well, you can keep on putting in your responses, but it's exciting to see. Looks like 76% of you agree that high dosage tutoring or high impact tutoring is a really important big bet. And which is great. And it looks like also very important is the idea of learning happens everywhere, which is a huge, great thing. We will have lots of sessions on that. But anyway, to high dosage tutoring, now we're up to 78% of you think that's very important. And that really is the focus of today's discussion. We really get to take a deep dive into this approach today. So as you likely know, the Biden administration has just launched 2 initiatives that will provide new opportunities and resources to assist schools and communities in responding to the immense challenges that were confirmed by the NAEP results. The National Partnership for Student Success will deploy 250,000 caring adults as tutors, mentors, and coaches. In addition, the Engage Every Student initiative aims to expand out-of-school time and summer learning opportunities. And so given CGLR's big bets, especially the big bet on high dosage tutoring, there's much anticipation about the new energy, attention, and resources. And with this excitement also comes questions. And today we have the opportunity to get an early briefing on the new initiatives and the chance to learn from the leaders who are shaping the next steps and also potentially inform them with our questions and comments. So we are super excited to hear from Shital Shah of the U.S. Department of Education, who will share an overview of both initiatives and a more detailed review of the National Partnership for Student Success. National organizers Bob Balfanz of the Everyone Graduates Center and Kate Cochran of NPSS will join Shah to explain how the initiative will roll out and how local communities can take advantage of the available technical assistance and resources. John, our excellent moderator, will then moderate a panel discussion of national and local leaders about their reactions to the NPSS announcement and how they plan to leverage the resources to engage more tutors, mentors, and coaches and expand programming to more children and families. And we do encourage you to join us again for part 2 on October 11th, when we'll take a deeper dive into the Engage Every Student initiative with a similar panel that we have today. We also really want to understand your questions and feedback. So as Sierra said earlier, please be sure to use the Q&A box. So really specifically, the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to post the questions and comments that you want our speakers to hear. So make sure we're being really clear about this. Q&A box is for the questions and comments that you want these speakers to see. The chat is kind of for everything else. So the chat gets really busy during these webinars. So we want to make sure if there's things that you want our great, like super stellar panel to hear and respond to, please post those in the Q&A throughout the session. And we'll have time in the session towards the end to get to respond to as many questions as you can. And those that we don't have the time to respond to today, we'll go to our panel and go to who are the national organizers of this new initiative, and they'll respond to you after the session today. And so to begin our conversation, I'm honored to very briefly introduce our stellar panel, encourage you to access the full bios linked in the chat. So of course, John Gomperts, by now, many of you know our great moderator, who is CGLR's executive fellow, John Gomperts. He's a longtime leader in nonprofits and government organizations devoted to civic engagement and to creating greater opportunity for children and youth. Before joining us, John served as president and CEO of America's Promise Alliance and as the director of AmeriCorps in the Obama administration. Our awesome presenters include Shital Shah, who is the Director of Strategic Partnerships in the Office of Secretary at the U.S. Department of Education. Prior to joining the department, she was the Director of Philanthropic Engagement at the American Federation of Teachers and also served on the 2020 Biden-Harris transition team for the U.S. Department of Education. She has also spent over a decade working in the field of community schools policy and practice. Robert Balfanz is a research professor at the Center for the Social Organization of Schools, I just so love that, at Johns Hopkins University's School of Education, where he is the director of the Everyone Graduates Center. He has published widely on secondary school reform, high school dropouts, early warning systems, chronic absenteeism, school climate, and instructional interventions in high poverty schools. Kate Cochran is the managing director of the National Partnership for Student Success, and prior to this role, Kate served as chief of staff and a founding team member at Innovate EDU, an organization focused on closing opportunity gaps in education through the development of innovative models and tools to serve, inform, and enhance teaching and learning. And we have our great panel of commentators. We have Denise Forte, who is the interim CEO at the Education Trust, and with more than 2 decades of experience in the federal, legislative, and executive branches advancing progressive education and family policy, Denise brings strategic leadership to the organization's efforts to engage policymakers and diverse coalitions of advocates in demanding and securing equity, advancing policy change at the national and state levels. And I will say quickly, we were expecting Mayoshi Moses, who's vice president of AARP Foundation Experience Corps, but unfortunately she's under the weather today and unable to join us, but we do instead get to have Dave Handy, who's the director of the program implementation team. And Dave spearheads the team that leads strategic and operational management support for the Experience Corps nationwide network of 17 program partners. And prior to joining AARP, Dave worked with communities and schools for 14 years. We also have Munro Richardson, who is the executive director of Read Charlotte, a community initiative that unites families, educators, and community partners with the goal of improving children's reading in Mecklenburg County from birth through 3rd grade. In this role, he is responsible for using research, data, and strategic funding to coordinate, integrate, and align the efforts of dozens of organizations across Charlotte-Mecklenburg. He is also an advisory board member of the North Carolina Education Corps, a statewide initiative that recruits, trains, and places tutors in school districts across North Carolina. And finally, we have Liz Ross, who serves as the New Jersey Program Officer at the Overdeck Family Foundation, where she leads a portfolio of innovative projects with her passion for education in New Jersey and 20+ years of experience in the nonprofit sector. Prior to joining OFF, she was director of outreach at Bedtime Math, an organization dedicated to helping young children learn to love math. Okay, what a stellar panel. So now I'm super excited to turn it over to John Gomperts to get our conversation going first with Shital Shah. So John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Emily. And thanks to Emily and Sierra, who always do such an outstanding job in putting together these webinars and supporting it. I love doing these webinars. I think those of you who've seen me before know that. But this one is, I have to say, special for me. I spent a lot of my career on topics exactly like what we're going to talk about today. Efforts to engage citizens, community members, neighbors in focused work to help create opportunities for young people, especially those who are struggling to get ahead, to do better in school, starting with reading. So this is really, really right in my sweet spot. And my experience, both working in the administration and working in some programs, including Experience Corps, which is represented here today, is that these kind of initiatives, like the National Partnership for Student Success and like Engage Every Student, are simultaneously tremendously exciting, and they leave me somewhat skeptical and concerned. And the point of this discussion is really to explore both of those parts of this. What's exciting about these initiatives, but today especially NPSS, and what are our concerns? And we have the people with us who are going to be trying to lead this effort. So expressing our concerns early, it should be very helpful to them in shaping responses and shaping the program, which is still being born. So to get us started, I'm going to ask Shital to join on screen and give us just a little bit of a high-level overview from the administration's perspective of what, how did this come about? What are you trying to do? What are we doing here?
Great. Thank you, John. And honored to be in this conversation for a little bit of it. And so what are we trying to do? Obviously, the big, I don't know, elephant's not the right word, but the pandemic has been front and center for the administration and our families and communities and students and educators and anyone and everyone in all communities. And the one windfall that we have had as an administration are federal relief funds. And so we know what works. We have evidence-based strategies on how we should be best supporting our young people and the adults that are with them. And so what the administration wanted to do, noticing the gaps, obviously, right? It's not just us who see the gaps, but folks in schools and in communities are seeing a shortage of adults. And we're also seeing that our young people, because of the trauma that they have that's been exacerbated, it would be wrong of me to say that they're just now facing, because so many of our students and families have had trauma and other barriers to being able to access, whether academics or summer learning or tutors or all of those other wraparound supports that we know they need. Before the pandemic, they had the need then. It's been exacerbated. And so with these federal relief funds, it's right now a one-time opportunity for us. And by us, I mean the federal government, as well as our community-based organizations, our state level organizations, and others in the private sector to come together collectively like we haven't before. And so many places have already been doing this. So have the foundation for collaboration, right? So building off of what those places are already doing, but supporting more places to be able to collaborate and build capacity to support our young people. And so we see this federal funding as that opportunity. And really, how are we going to address these needs that students have? And one of the first things that came to mind, because the president did give us a call to action, we need more adults in our school buildings and communities offering those supports and services that we know are needed beyond the instructional piece, but complementary too, right? And so that's where the National Partnership for Student Success, that's one of the ways it came about, is we got this charge, 250,000 tutors and mentors. Okay, how do we make that happen? And so we pulled together the best thinking out there that was already being had, brought everyone together with the AmeriCorps, and are super grateful for the partnership with AmeriCorps and the Johns Hopkins Everyone Graduate Center and having pulled this off, at least to get it launched, right? And so, John, stop me if I'm over talking.
This is exactly.
This is really exciting, and Kate and Bob know that this, it was being born for some time, and the stars aligned, and so that's where we are right now. And you're going to hear more from Kate and Bob in terms of this call to action that we're responding to recruit, train, and engage caring adults to support students in the evidence-based roles that we know, right? And so what are they? And Emily, you alluded to them at the very beginning, I think, but the academic tutors and mentors, of course, but beyond that, the student success coaches, the post-secondary transition coaches, right? How are we supporting young people to figure out their path, whether it be career or a 2 or 4 year institution, but supporting them whichever path they choose. Providing the wraparound support site coordinators, right? As well as those youth development professionals and mentors that I just mentioned. So those 5 roles, there's evidence out there, Bob, I know is going to probably speak to it, that those are the 5 adults we need in kids' lives every single day in and out of school time, which is why also the partnership with the AmeriCorps is tremendously important, impactful, and we need more people to go out and become AmeriCorps volunteers. And I'm not plugging for AmeriCorps, but I was in the Peace Corps, so I have a special place in my heart for national service. So I will stop there. That's MPSS.
So Shital, tell us a little, when you talk about the resources,
yes,
the world of resources for things for schools and kids is confusing and sometimes overwhelming right now. So when you talk about the resources that are being devoted to this initiative, to NPSS specifically, can you isolate and identify those for people so they understand what we're talking about?
Yeah, and so the federal resources I'm talking about are the American Rescue Plans and the ESSER funds, right? And so that funding can be used to support any one of those 5 support professionals that I mentioned, tutors, mentors, etc. So what we're saying is districts, SEAs, please use your funding to work within your district and with community-based organizations who have the capacity and technical expertise to provide you with any one or all 5 of those types of adults, right? And then that's where our MPSS hub comes in, which we have 5 technical assistance partners, 1 for each of those types of adults to build their capacity in those places where they don't have them. And so the federal funding I'm talking about, which is designated through 2024, right? It runs out then. And so the question, John, and the concern maybe that you were sort of in your head, you're thinking about is, well, then what happens after these federal relief funds sort of are gone, right?
Yep.
And go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Question for you.
No. Go ahead. I think that there are a couple of questions here about the money, Shital. Like, so we're talking about a not just an acceptable use, but an encouraged use of existing funds. We're talking from the AmeriCorps perspective, and I think Bob and Kate will talk about this a little bit, of actually some new funds being available for a community coordinator kind of roles. But is what you're talking about really a very much encouraged use of existing funds?
It is. And another sort of from the Department of Ed's sort of funding streams, another pot of funding that you already see going into this, and we will continue to encourage, is the Full Service Community Schools Federal Grant, right? For which the deadline is September 12th for folks to apply. But because that funding it's explicit in there, you can use it for wraparound community school coordinators, right?
Correct. Okay, great. And we know that this is all an interesting public-private partnership involving Bob and Kate and their team and others. What's the federal government going to do going forward to make this to help people make this a success? Because the success will be found on the ground, not in a fun announcement in the White House, but on the ground. So how can you help folks take advantage of this opportunity?
So how we can help them take advantage, other than, I mean, one of the ways, and it's not helping them take advantage, but it is us amplifying and continuing to sort of beat the drum on the funds that can be used and really encouraging community-based organizations to get engaged. But I think even more importantly, to have the LEAs and the community-based organizations actually partnering for this. And that's one of the, and you'll see this next month with Engage Every Student, as well as MPSS for the secretary. It is very important that we at the federal level model what we want to see happen locally, right? And so this partnership that we have is only as good or as strong as those partnerships and collaborations locally and how they sustain, which is why the work that MPSS is doing to build capacity locally, that's what's going to sustain this, right? And we will continue to push for funding to get funding from Congress to support all of the sort of efforts that we're asking folks to do here, but then also internally align within our grant programs, right? So the department, we push out grants from the money that Congress gives us. And the more alignment we have internally, and which I can say is we are very internally aligned and really having these conversations. So it's not just window dressing for us, we are doing internal work to help support this.
That's fantastic. And thank you for doing a little advertisement for our upcoming session. Again with you on October 11th, where we'll do a deep dive into the Engage Every Student effort, which is more focused on out of school time, including summer, correct?
Yes, but builds on, and we need MPSS to be able to move and create
exactly. So these things are created, are connected, and need to stay connected. Shital, thanks so much. Stay on as long as you can. I know you have another engagement, but thank you so much. And I think on behalf of the campaign, just express our excitement that the administration is so committed to this focused effort around really equitable learning recovery and acceleration of young people's progress in school.
No, really appreciate the time. And everyone who's on here, please share your examples of how you're doing this work. I know Kate and Bob will also make that ask, but that's what's really also important, is helping us make the case that this is the right thing to continue doing. So thank you, John, and everyone.
Thanks very much. And we'll see you again next month to talk about Engage Every Student. And Bob and Kate, can you join us now on screen? There you are. Thanks so much. Bob, are you on screen? Yeah, there you are. Okay, great. All right, Bob. Yeah, I mean, you and I have only been talking about this for I don't know how long. I don't even want to talk about how long we've been talking.
Don't want
about
to say.
this. Yeah. We don't want to say, but caring adults, helping students. Yeah, exactly. I know you've done a lot of research on this and you have a lot of experience. So before we get into some of the details and the nuts and bolts with Kate, like, I think it would be useful for people to hear what brought you to this notion of a large investment in large numbers of caring adults focused on helping young people succeed in school.
Yeah. So, we know there's been, unmet student need for a long time. That's why we've been talking about this for a long time. But we also know the pandemic sort of put that over the top, right, in still unmeasurable ways. And we know that, it did two big things. And it interrupted instruction and it disconnected kids from school. And those are related, but different challenges. And then we also know that, everyone experienced the pandemic, but experienced it differently. So it's not the case that we can just have a one size fits all. We'll just have everyone come to school for an extra month for 3 years and we'll all catch up, right? Because everyone had different experience and different needs. And so we know you have to have sort of a customized supports. And then finally, we know from really the science of learning and development that while every year of schooling matters and every week of schooling matters, there are some times in the schooling progression that are more important than others for long-term success. So as you all well know, learning to read by third grade or so before is really critical to long-term success. Making the transition from arithmetic to mathematics in sort of upper elementary, early middle school, right? If you don't make that swing, you're going to struggle for a while. Often forgotten, but it's a broader interest, but it's important to say is that, think about first generation kids that were interested in STEM careers and suddenly had to take chemistry and physics and calculus virtually and didn't really get good instruction in that, right? That's going to really be potentially a long-term setback for them, right? Because it's hard to make that up, right? Who's giving you second chance chemistry and calculus, right? So that tells us that our response to this has to be personalized and has to be relationship driven, because that disconnection to schooling is there too, not just I need some technical fixes in my knowledge. It's like I got to be rebrought back into school too. It has to be customized because different kids are going to be different needs, and it has to be adaptive, right? Because again, different times, different seriousnesses. So that really gets us things like tutoring and mentoring and coaching, because that's the only place where you can really have that customization, personalization, and adaptability. And then because of the need, we have to try to do it at scale, right? We just can't do it as a few, one extra person working with 10 kids in a school, right? It could be 100 kids in a school that need this, or hundreds in a big enough school.
Yeah.
So that's what really got us thinking about. And, fortunately, we knew there's a good evidence base for high quality tutoring, high quality mentoring, and we know they're effective. So it really becomes this engineering problem, which you're familiar with some of our other work, John, of how to getting these things that work to where they're needed at the scale required. And that's really what got us to NPSS and the focus on mentoring and tutoring and success coaching, which I'll just quickly say is really a sort of combination of the two, sort of blending academic and social emotional supports together. And, and where this is really important is really when we have kids that have had even pre-pandemic challenges with chronic absenteeism and were exacerbated by the pandemic, right? We know one of the things about tutoring is it's supposed to be high frequency, high dosage. But if you're not there to get it every 3 times a week for an hour because of chronic absenteeism issues, that tutoring is not going to make a difference. So success coaching really blends the social, emotional, and the academic the subset of kids that need those simultaneous supports.
Fantastic. Bob, I have a million questions, but I'm going to go to some of the nuts and bolts with Kate, and then we'll come back to some of these questions. I thought that was a terrific overview. Thanks so much. So let me just ask it simple. How's this going to work? Like, how does this work? There's these federal funds which already exist, but maybe there's some new funds with AmeriCorps, and we have an audience of people who are in community-based organizations or local regional funders, and they must be thinking, well, yeah, okay, this sounds good, but like what? How does this? How do we access this? How's this? What are the mechanics? Bob, you talked about it as an engineering problem. So I would love it if the two of you would give us a little sort of flyover of the mechanics of NPSS, at least as you envision them now.
Absolutely. Great question, John. And Sierra, I do have a slide that I think will be helpful as I describe some of the mechanics. If you could put it up.
There we go.
Thank you so much. So really, in order to achieve this overarching goal of getting an additional 250,000 people into these 5 roles, which are on the screen. Thank you for putting those questions in the chat. I think sometimes we forget what a mouthful it is to say each of these roles in one sentence. But really, we are looking to create connective tissue, both at a national level and at a state level and local level, between the broad range of stakeholders who are already supporting students and communities. This includes schools, districts, community-based organizations, nonprofit youth-serving organizations, local health departments, libraries, rec centers. It includes a broad range of folks, including, I'm sure, many people on this call, and think about how we can make it easier for folks to collaborate to get students the support that they need in their particular community. We know that in some communities, folks may already have all these 5 supports. That's great. In some communities, folks may have none and want 1, or have none and want 2. And really, we are here to support communities in creating partnerships, in making connections with others, both within their own communities and at the state and federal level, to help get these support, to help solve this engineering challenge, because we know it is going to look different community by community. And so some of the big overarching things that we're thinking about here, and Sierra, feel free to take down the slide. I appreciate it. We first need to identify where all these people are going to come from. So we know that recruitment is one of the most significant challenges, if not the most significant challenge, that schools, districts, youth-serving nonprofits are facing right now. 2, we need to ensure that connections exist within communities to actually deploy these people. And so figuring out how we can encourage partnerships between K-12 and higher education, K-12 and out-of-school time providers, AmeriCorps programs, et cetera. And that list can go on and on. And then 3rd, really establishing some quality markers to make sure that the programs that we're implementing are actually having a positive impact on students. And so kind of specifically what we are doing, what Bob and I are doing with a great team, is we've established a nonprofit support hub, we're calling it, at the Everyone Graduate Center at Johns Hopkins, that is providing technical assistance to schools, districts, nonprofits, and others, state education departments. We've gotten a really wide range of requests who are looking to implement new programs, who are looking to expand existing programs that they are operating, but may be having trouble with recruiting volunteers or employees, for example, or maybe having trouble establishing partnerships with a local school or a local nonprofit. And we're also providing that technical assistance to support existing programs in improving their operation and their offerings. So we're getting a lot of questions around, I have a tutoring program, but given the needs of the students we're serving right now, I need some more support on how to better train people to meet meet the needs of the students that they're serving today. So we're doing a lot of technical assistance work there, and that's led by, as Shital mentioned, 6 leading organizations in each of those 5 NPSS categories. So we're working with the National Student Support Accelerator and Accelerate on tutoring, communities in schools and wraparound supports, Mentor on mentoring, City Year on success coaching, and the National College Attainment Network on post-secondary transition coaching. We're also doing a lot of work to build awareness and evidence that about these evidence-based supports, and that we think that people should be using these supports, that there are great examples that already exist for both partnerships and individual programs who are doing quality work.
And
we're doing a lot. Oh yeah, go ahead, Bob.
I was going to jump in, John and Kate, and just give one sort of like really grounded example of what a challenge we've identified and we're grappling with and we're really looking for advice on. So, part of the insight we had into this is that there are a lot of resources out there that are not connected to each other. So for example, we've had a lot of engagement and a lot of like higher ed institutions coming to us trying to figure out how to be more engaged with their K-12 schools. Right? You think like we should have that hardwired into our system? We don't.
Yeah.
Right. And when you think about it, the way a lot of K-12 is organized, it really comes down to almost the most overstretched person in the system right now, the school principal, having to figure out, well, where do I get mentors or tutors? How do I know they're any good? And in the perfect world that will never exist, I go out, I'll interview 5 of them and find the best one. There's not a single principal in America that has time to do that, right? And then we have these really great youth-serving organizations and communities that want to connect to schools and don't have a personal relationship with that principal because there's been change and all kinds of turnover. And they're left to sending them an email, which becomes one of thousands of emails that principal has. And maybe they get classified in that vendor category. There's a lot of people trying to sell principals stuff for that federal money now, right? Their inboxes are inundated with people trying to get that money. So we're really trying to figure out, who are the local organizations that can broker that relationship between those youth service provider organizations where we can hopefully get more higher ed sending some more people to, and the schools folks to say, let's have a conversation on how we can help each other, right? We believe we need local community brokers to do that. And that's what we're really working hard to identify and sort of map out.
So that Bob and Kate, that was so good. You mentioned, without my prompting, some of the things that I think we really want to explore in this conversation. And props to you, Bob, for when we talked earlier, saying you really want to hear from people. You really need to hear from people about what's going on. So I made notes around collaboration, and is your diagnosis or your prognosis of what's standing in the way of collaboration around basically overload and insufficient number of folks. I think we'll hear from Munro and from Liz from their on the ground experience about what makes collaboration really hard. Kate, the comment about recruiting is something that I'm constantly concerned about. I know the struggles that AmeriCorps programs are having recruiting right now. They can't fill slots. So how are we going to get another 250,000 people? And I know Dave has been thinking about this a lot from the Experience Corps perspective. And then this question of quality, which I think we really want to visit with Denise, who's Ed Trust has done such outstanding work on the power of high dosage tutoring, but also what's involved in unleashing that power. So really good questions. Kate, you want to put up the slide just showing like who's involved right now, and then let's turn to the panel. And I'm going to ask Kate and Bob just to stay with us for the panel, and we'll all have a conversation. We'll try to sort this out, and we very much want we want to sort this out with the people who are listening as well. So engage. As Emily said, if you want to post a question in the Q&A box and or just in the chat if you want to have a conversation. Bob, and Kate, can you say a little bit? I mean, it was generous of you to say you want to know what people want. Tell us what if we've got couple of hundred community leaders and local and regional funders, like, what do you need to know to help provide the right resources and accelerate this project? What kind of questions would be helpful to you all?
Yeah, so the key questions that we've been asking a lot of people and that have been super valuable for us to hear from people about are, you've heard a little bit about what we're envisioning in your program, your community. What barriers do you see to implementation? That's super helpful to know. And then also, what barrier busters or creative solutions have you seen implemented in your community to overcome challenges related to recruitment, partnerships, funding, and there are other things there, but what creative solutions have you already seen implemented? And then where do you see examples of this already working? Has your program already established a great partnership with a K-12 school and you learned a lot from it and it's now working? We want to hear about that so that we can enable others to learn from what you went through to get there.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. I hope everybody will engage in that conversation and post specific questions as well. So with that, Bob, Kate, stick with us and let's have Denise and Dave, Munro and Liz all join us on camera. Welcome. It's nice to see all of you. Dave, we can only see oh yeah, there you are. Munro, thanks for joining us. Always great. Love this. I want to start with just a lightning round. I have more detailed questions, but like a lightning round, 15 seconds each. What excites you and what concerns you with this new undertaking? Denise, what's exciting and what are you worrying about?
I think I'm most excited about how quickly folks came together when there was a problem identified about sourcing people for tutors. So the energy there, that is something that is not often found when we invoke the name of the federal government. So I was very excited about that. And I think too, what concerns me, and some of that was posted in the chat, I really do encourage folks, and I think this group of folks who are on the program today, all of you out in the audience, you are community-based organizations, and we need to go there first. You know your communities, you know your kids, you know your parents, you can get to them quickly, and that's what we need. So that authenticity, I'm excited about, and we need more of.
Awesome. Liz, excited, concerned?
Sure. As a funder, I think we're excited that NPSS will draw some national attention and interest to evidence-based programs. It's something we're very passionate about at the foundation. And I think concerns is just how we're going to get the adults to start helping us, especially I'll talk later about the investment we made in our New Jersey tutoring corps and how to make that connection so that we can scale that program and get more adults involved.
Fantastic. Dave, excited, concerned?
I'm very excited about the energy that's coming forward around the impact that the NPSS is going to have and getting the attention of people who would like to tutor. I think our number one way to gather tutors is for the local community organization to have strong tutors and word of mouth, spreading the name and spreading the word. So this at the national level provides kind of a nice umbrella support for it and gets attention out to it. The concern for us, I think, is I think recognizing that the need is just so immense and knowing that we're going to have a collaborative approach, as you suggested, in order to maximize our reach without diluting the quality of what we're delivering to the kids who deserve our best efforts.
Fantastic. Munro, I know like 15 to 30 seconds is not easy for you because you have a lot of thoughts about this, but just give us show us the highlight reel or the preview.
So I would join all my colleagues and all the things that they said that they're excited about. I'm certainly excited about the networks and the opportunity for networking across the country down into local communities, particularly focus on accelerating learning and impact so that not everybody has to like reinvent the wheel. So excited about that. I am worried about how local community groups are able to get some of the resources that were discussed when Bob talked about vendors. I'm concerned, given my local view, and maybe you'll ask me more about this later, that the procurement rules attached to the federal funds are turning those relationships into vendors-based relationships rather than partnerships.
Wow, excellent. Denise, let's following up on what Munro just raised about his excitement here. You've done so much work on high intensity tutoring and why it's important for unfinished learning. I'd love to hear a little bit from the EdTrust perspective about why you think this is so important and timely right now.
Well, I think for most of the folks who are on this webinar today, the NAEP data from last week just sort of confirmed our worst fears that the pandemic did have an extreme impact on students of color, students from low-income communities, their families, impact on employment and health, all of which really did connect with how kids were doing in school. And we've now learned that we have seen the biggest drop in 30 years in reading, and math performance fell for the first time in the history of long-term trend assessments. Just really highlighting how deeply the pandemic interrupted student learning across racial and socioeconomic lines. And it clearly shows that students who are underserved here have not been receiving the resources and supports that they need to succeed. The unfinished learning these students are experiencing right now is a product of long-standing systemic inequities, we know this, but exacerbated by additional barriers to learning, such as underfunded schools struggling to adapt to virtual learning due to technology barriers, teachers spending more time reviewing older content in schools with fewer resources, and as I mentioned earlier, the health and economic aspects. But the good news here is the evidence is also clear that there's much we can do to chart the best, fastest pathway toward a successful pandemic recovery that is equitable and offering a high quality education for all kids based on the science of learning and development. And it is these evidence-based strategies, when students, they succeed when given the opportunity. There's no doubt about that. That means every student having access to experienced and certified teachers, high quality tutoring, extended learning time, strong relationships and positive school climates. These are things that we know can help and accelerate learning. We don't need to remediate. The research also shows that that's not necessary and it doesn't work. Accelerating does. And so the good news here is that there's also federal funding to help, almost $125 billion. And when you think about how we're gonna address unfinished learning for students most affected by COVID-19, making sure those dollars are being spent now is critical. And perhaps that's my other message. Let's get that money spent.
Well, so keep going. You're on a hot roll now. We have a lot of people who on this call who run program, but they also are advocates, and they wear both of those hats. People like Munro and Liz and others as well. So how can people on this call advocate for the policymakers at the state and local level to make sure to focus these dollars in the most effective way? What's your message around that?
I start with the data. And look, if we don't have good data on how our students are performing, if we don't have the necessary data on where the dollars are and how they're being used, we will not be able to make those connections, nor will we be able to effectively advocate for those dollars to be better spent. So foundation for us at EdTrust will always be, let's look at the data on student performance. Let's understand what the community needs are. Let's understand how many school counselors are in the building, so that when we do use the funds, we know exactly where to target them. And we also know that the evidence base that's out there to support the targeting of those funds. For far too long, we've gone in a place where we just scatter dollars everywhere without really knowing that you need to target them to the communities that need it in order to be most effective. But I think we're in a different place now. I really hope we're at a different place now, that people are going to look towards the data to make these decisions. And that's what we as advocates need to be doing as well, making sure, one, calling for the data to be public, data to be disaggregated. And then you can say, and guess what? The evidence base also suggests that these 3 initiatives are what's working. High dosage tutoring, accelerated learning, extended day. It's really the perfect match.
Great. I may come back to you around some of that advocacy and some of the questions around data. Thanks so much. Liz, you and Overdeck have just been huge leaders in investing in high dosage tutoring. And I imagine that makes you excited about NPSS, but you're also very close to the work on the ground. And I've listened to you on other sessions talk about, like, this is super complicated. So talk a little bit about what the complications at a local and state level are for getting people to work together, recruiting, all of the things that make this so difficult.
Sure. Like you said, as a foundation, we knew we needed evidence-based solutions in sort of facing the challenges that kids are facing, socio-emotional challenges, academic challenges, and we knew from the outset that there was no time to really waste here. One of the things that you've heard a lot already on this webinar is the importance of cross-sector collaboration, and that's something that we really focused on when we were thinking about how to respond. And so to get a statewide tutoring program off the ground, we knew that cross-sector collaboration was really important, especially also as we were thinking about the sustainability of the program and trying to get funding, state funding and public funding for the program. So we engaged with a lot of partners on the ground, the College of New Jersey, the Boys and Girls Clubs in the state, the Y Alliance, other members of the private funding community to really get this going in the summer of 2021. One of our core values at the foundation is to learn better together. And so what we really focused on was learning from people who are doing this work, like the Tennessee Tutoring Corps, to try to just learn from them and to build off of some of the work that was already happening. I think with MPSS, a way we can work with them and what we're really looking forward to is sharing some of these on the ground lessons and the wins from the program, while also having the space to solve some of the persistent challenges that we faced with the Tutoring Corps, one of which is recruitment of tutors. We've relied pretty much exclusively on pre-service teachers to start, and we know to scale this effort in the state, that's not going to be the best path forward, or we're not going to be able to scale the way we want to with only pre-service teachers. So we're really looking forward to working with MPSS on that specifically. And we're, again, like I mentioned, excited that this will draw some national attention to the New Jersey Tutoring Corps, and that we can share some of the challenges and try to help solve them.
Fantastic. Thanks. I'll be back to you in a minute. Munro, you asked me to come back to you. I'm going to do that now. You're up 2 years in all this stuff in Charlotte and actually in North Carolina around with Tutoring Corps. Tell us a little about the instructional strategies that you have invested in and what you've seen work, and then the intersection of those ideas of what you think is most efficacious with what NPSS is making possible, perhaps.
Thanks, John. So you're right. We've been at the work of researching and promoting tutoring for about 5 years here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And, when we think about the role of tutoring, it's really about providing more instructional time, more opportunity for children, particularly those that need additional supports beyond which schools are able to provide. And we know that that is heavily concentrated in our Title I schools that have more need but don't have enough just hours in the day and people to be able to support kids. And that's really where the opportunities to provide trained adults that can provide sort of intensive interventions at the level of quality, that a teacher assistant or maybe a teacher can do, can be really, really helpful and effective. I think the challenge that we've tried to watch out for is this idea that something is better than nothing. And it's one thing to say evidence-based, but when you get into the realities of just the whole range of needs that kids have, sometimes it's easy to sort of fall into that. And if we think about this as sort of educational medicine, which is the way I think about it, we wouldn't just give any child any medicine. You want to give the right medicine to the right child in the right dosage at the right time. We need to do the same thing when it comes to tutoring, which I think of as educational medicine. And so it's the one thing that I worry about is, what's the story that's going to be written 3 and 4 years from now about this big effort on tutoring? We want to make sure that that's a positive story. So how do we ensure that? I look at MPSS as a vehicle to give us an opportunity at a national level, state, regional, local level to have those positive stories. Because the reality is that if you're running schools every day, you don't necessarily have the time to research which groups are effective. I've looked at so many groups in the chat that sort of talked about, their programs and what they're doing. But as someone said earlier, principals getting 100 messages a day from everyone who's got the very best thing to sell them. We need some sort of, third party, some broker that can help, educational leaders to know what's effective, what should I invest my time and energy into? Because at the end of the day, they're looking for positive results for their students as well. When I think about those NAEP results in particular, that Denise talked about, I go back, most fundamentally to Scarborough's reading rope, really sort of the two strands, the word recognition, and we're really looking for kids to have automatic word recognition. Like all of us, we automatically read, we can see the words, and then we're spending a lot of our time on meaning making, which is the other strand. And so our kids need help. And so whether we're talking about phonemic awareness, letter knowledge, phonics, fluency, that's all fitting underneath that basket of word recognition skills. And then, comprehension, writing, vocabulary, fitting under that meaning-making basket of skills. And I think it's important to make sure that we're getting the right medicine to the right kids at the right time. And that's one area where I really hope that MPSS is able to help local communities that may have limited capacity. Last thing I'll just say, and I just want to use North Carolina as sort of a microcosm. So we have 115 public school districts in our state. Charlotte, North Carolina is the second largest with about 140,000 students. But the median school district in North Carolina has about 5,300 students. 90% of districts have less than 25,000 students in them, which means there's a lot of districts that have a lot of need, but don't have the capacity to sort of sort through all of this. And unless we provide that support, giving them lots of additional dollars through the ESSER and AARP funds is part of the equation. The other part of the equation is helping them and the local community groups know how to use those dollars. And that's what I hope that the biggest impact of MPSS can be at a national, regional, and local level.
So Munro, I don't want to get you in trouble. You know that. But also we previously have talked about the challenges of so many communities have homegrown programs that people love, and people love them for good reason, right? But they may not meet the standards. But when we get to choices at a local level, you've got some website that says you should do this, and you've got these local people who've got a marvelous, they think best in class program. And it seems to me that's one of the big challenges of trying to do something at the NPSS level and meeting the realities of how complicated relationships are in communities. Thoughts on that?
You're in a microcosm describing the messiness of this work. I think the strategy has to be yes and. Yes, we need evidence-informed models, and I'm a big believer in integrity over fidelity. We need to figure out how to adapt it in local context and figure out which pieces we need to hold tight to and which pieces can be modified. But the other part of the work has to be for programs that are seeing children every day. They are going to their after-school programs, they are going to their summer programs, they're going anyways. How do you help them be more impactful? How do you help them build their capacity so that they can get greater outcomes and do more good for the children they're serving? So I don't think it can be either or. And I think this is one place where we have to really focus on integrity over fidelity, but really focus on what are those pieces that we have to hold tight to, and then what are those pieces that we can adapt into, because I guarantee that, folks listening today, their communities are different than mine. I would not just say you should use this program because we're using it in Charlotte. We need to understand your local context. We need to honor the groups that are already in your community. But think about what are those the best evidence-based knowledge that we have, and help you. And it may be bringing a new organization or a new program to augment what you have, but hopefully it's also helping you do even more and get even greater impact with the children that you're already serving in your program.
Bob and Kate, I hope you're taking some notes because you have a world-class advisory group right here today.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Dave, I want to come to you on this question of recruiting. Liz mentioned it. We've been floating around this. I know that from my own experience at Experience Corps and at AmeriCorps, that these big national things can feel like exciting opportunities to recruit and retain people and have people feel like they're part of something big. But
Right.
Then we also know, I mean, that all sounds good. It's a good paragraph, but the reality of that is much more complicated and much more difficult. So talk a little bit about recruiting opportunities and challenges, and also training, as you mentioned earlier, because of these quality questions that Munro was just talking about.
Sure. I'd appreciate the comment made earlier that change happens at the speed of trust. And I think back to Bill Milliken's statement some time ago that programs don't change people, relationships change people. That for us, the relationship between us, our local program staff, and the volunteers is that linchpin. And if they don't believe they're coming into something that's meaningful, that's well put together, that's going to be impactful, our tutors don't want anything to do with us. So, what is the key to good recruiting? I think you could probably get 150,000 better people to tell me how to do that than me. But I would say from our experience, we do what makes sense locally. For service to students, we go where the students are. To engage volunteers, we go where our volunteers are. We've developed partnerships in Atlanta with DeKalb Human Services. So we go to the senior centers and we connect with them. In Orange County, California, pickleball is taken off. So we have a pickleball tournament. And by the way, we invite people to think about having an impact on the kids that most need them in their lives. So I think the opportunities continue to grow and have to be localized. The Sacramento Bee newspaper is the best way to get attention of older adults. So knowing the community is critical. It's not something we can come in from outside of the community and say, hey, here's what you do. But we do offer, here's 10 things that work in other communities, and we've seen these be impactful. In terms of training, I love that question. I think that we have to think about training from a different perspective, that we're aware of adult learning styles. We're aware that our volunteers have limited time. So we do our best to learn from our network of programs, our other practitioners, to take full advantage of the lessons learned. We leverage existing resources instead of trying to reinvent the wheel. I think Munro was talking about this, making sure that we're connecting with existing services, so we engage local schools as part of that training process. But to a large extent, we've centralized training, that we want to make it as easy as possible to put a tutor in a classroom so that when they step through that door, they know everything they need to know to run that first session and the second session and the third session. So we focus heavily on training on the front end. Our pre-service training is about 8 hours. We also know we can deliver training virtually or in person. We can deliver it asynchronously or all live. But what really matters is the opportunity to provide that tutor a chance to practice, so they get over their anxiety about what happens when they get into the classroom with the student. And again, the relationship piece of that is so key. Our relationship with our tutors, they have to have enough trust in us and faith in the material that we're training them to be able to step forward and move into their space and be genuine and authentic, and not so concerned with what do I do next, to miss the keys that are coming from that young child who is dealing with any number of things as they come into the tutoring session.
Yeah, I love those comments, Dave. And when you describe that complexity, it takes me to what Bob talked about at the beginning. The difficulty, like Experience Corps, you have about 2,000 members. You're trying to improve practice, do good recruiting. Oh, now we're going to talk about 250,000 new people and try to maintain quality at the same time. It's extremely hard. And I think what we know is that this is messy work. Liz and Munro really described that. The fact that it's messy, like, that's not that fun, but it doesn't mean it doesn't work. And we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. While we don't want to just drop, your educational medicine out of a helicopter, Munro, and everybody gets the same thing. We also don't want the messiness to get in the way of the benefits that can be delivered. Denise, I want to circle back to you around the question of targeting these resources. Use whatever language we want, whether it's equity, whether it's focusing on the kids who need the most help in the community, the kids who are struggling the most in the communities that are most challenged and least resourced. How do we make sure, to the greatest extent possible, when we're talking about so many communities, make sure is a little bit of a fantasy, but to the greatest extent possible, how can we get these resources most focused on the places where they're needed the most and where the benefits will be greatest?
I really loved that question, and it raised a few more questions for me. But I think the first thing that we really have to do, if we are intentional about driving equity, about making sure the resources getting to the kids who need it most, we have to commit to adopting a shared mindset that the pathway to accelerated recovery is going to take a while, and it's not going to be linear. We've heard from a bunch of folks on the panel, it's going to be a little messy. There are going to be both ands, and that can be good, because in the end, we do want a comprehensive yet flexible approach to supporting young people's academic, social, emotional, and health needs. It's not about getting back to normal, but it is about a shift in our education systems. So they're aligned about how children learn and develop. And so that's the first thing, incredibly important if we want to be able to sustain resources and capacity. And then to address, immediate challenges around accelerating learning and development, we're going to also have to be mindful of our educators and state and local leaders. Again, sort of going back to the data, making sure that we have the best information from existing evidence and continue to improve that information over time. And then, I mentioned this earlier about the data. We have got to make sure that information is public, both on student learning, how funds are used to support student learning, and disaggregate this data so we can understand how groups of students are learning and what interventions are going to work well or don't. I'll tell you, if we want to drive to equity, it's not really about more resources, more resources, more resources. That's a good start. And we need to be clear about who the children are that we need to serve, and how we make sure that the most effective way of delivering and the most effective programming or services are delivered to those students. And we've heard so many great examples today that I'm really thrilled about the opportunity that we have before us. But I do hope, and I'm fairly certain that the folks on this call do appreciate and do have a shared vision that this is the long game and we're going to have to be in it for a while, and that'll be good for equity too.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to do three things at the same time here. One, Emily, I see that there are a bunch of questions in the Q&A box, so I hope you will look and find questions that we ought to raise, and that you'll join us and do that. Two, Bob and Kate, I'm going to change your role and invite you to ask a question in a second if you want to. And three, Liz, while Bob and Kate think of whether they want to ask the panel anything, I'm curious of your reaction to what Denise just said and your experience in New Jersey around both this question of focus and targeting and the question of quality that Munro raised?
Sure. I think we learned pretty early on how important it was to embed our program in established networks of community-based organizations like the Boys and Girls Club and the Y. It provided us with access to the kids that needed the tutoring the most, but it also gave our program some automatic credibility that in fact we actually needed at the beginning, because we hadn't done tutoring before. We were establishing this program from scratch, basically. So I think that was a good starting place for us. Training is a big part of our program. Even though our tutors are pre-service teachers, training is a really big part of it. And we now in our second round of training teachers, and the fidelity of the training and getting these pre-service teachers to all understand the importance of their role, not just their academic role, but their supportive role as a caring adult sitting with a child, has been very important. And I think to react a little bit to what Denise was saying about the data, I think a unique role that we can play as a funder, but also as a sort of on the ground partner with this program, is to elevate the data and these evidence-based programs and encourage other funders to invest in those things like mentoring, like tutoring, the things that we know that work. I think we're in a unique position to elevate that.
Well, Bob and Kate, if I were you, I'd be totally energized and totally overwhelmed by what I heard in the last hour. So I'm curious if there's anything you'd like to ask the panel. And Emily, then I'm going to go to you for some questions from our friends in the on the internet.
And I'll do a twofer for you, John and Emily, which is I'll ask questions and asking the questions, maybe answer some of the questions we've been getting from the audience. I saw.
Outstanding.
So there's two issues that I've heard running through this dialogue and conversation. Like, one is, where are we going to get these people? And it's hard. And on that, I would say that it's an area we're going to need help and advocacy for, and also even more ideas. But I'm just going to give you 3 areas we're going deep in really quickly. One is college work study. 700,000 kids a year are involved in college work study. It's a federally funded program that gives 10 to 15 hours a week. It's got its own funding source that goes forever. In theory, 7% of that time is supposed to go to community service. We actually found there's some regulatory issues that some colleges are interpreting that to be, because of the language, that they can't actually work in K-12 schools, because they're supposed to serve places that everybody can access for the community. And so that's a place we can work with AmeriCorps and the feds to improve that regulation. But our ambitions are actually to get up to 15% of work study, because that would give us 100,000 kids a year, right, who could do these roles as sort of a foundational source. The other one is that the big youth service providers and some of these local ones that we heard Munro talk about, if you talk to like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Y, 4-H, YMCA, you add it up, they all will tell you there's about 5 million adults through their organizations that are volunteering in schools some way right now. If only a small percent of those are willing to be skilled up a little bit and to take a second additional further step, because they've already made some commitments, that's another 100,000, right? And it's only getting 1 or 2% of them. And then the one most recently, and that's why people keep giving us ideas, because we keep adding to our list, is 12th graders. There's 4 million 12th graders every year. They have a lot of time on their hands. Most schools stopped by December, functionally, in many places. And it could be a way to get credits, to get experience, to make connections to post-secondary. There's some marvelous programs out there. Arizona University has one that combines AmeriCorps, college students, and 12th graders, and uses the 12th graders' works as tutors to get them connected to make sure they come to the university. And so there's lots of ways to get sort of bank shots on this. So people keep helping us think about other areas where there could be potential for large numbers of people to be recruited. Because we know it's so hard to do this locally. That's why we think a national effort has more potential to go and get a lot of universities excited, or to get like a lot of the big national organizations to sort of come together to figure out how to train folks up. And then one other one really quick is, how do we make this authentically local? How do we build those relationships? One of the things we've advocated for, and Secretary Cardona is now also about advocating for, to use this federal money for, is for schools to invest in things like a community partnership coordinator. right? Because for 3 years, if you fund somebody to build those relationships, it's the startup work in relationships that's really hard. When you're going from zero to something, once you have a relationship, it's easier to maintain. So it's a place where it makes sense that a short-term funding can make a big difference. That's not where people automatically go to think, where should I spend my federal relief dollars to overcome the pandemic? But those coordination efforts are critical, but it's going to require local advocacy for people. And that's why I'm so excited the secretary is starting to do this. Like, we need that cover for principals to say, I invested in coordination, as opposed to a direct service for kids or longer learning time, which is easier. But we need, without the people doing that relationship building, relationships don't get built. So that's another area we need ideas around and advocacy for.
Great, helpful. Emily, questions from the audience that you want to advance? There you are.
Hi, yeah, there's a lot, and I'm trying to see if I can kind of smush some together from a couple people. So I'm sorry if I'm not saying everybody's names who have asked these questions. And I'm going to say again, if you have not yet, if you put a question in the chat that you have not yet transferred over to the Q&A, please do that now, because as you can see, the chat is super crowded. It's much easier for us to see your questions for the speakers if you post it in the Q&A. So please make sure your question is posted in the Q&A. So there's a couple questions of digging a little deeper. So Denise, especially you have talked a lot about data. So I'm going to combine two questions. So the question is, what about the kids who are like constantly passed over, constantly looked over? They really need the tutoring, but for some reason they're not getting lined up, they're not being seen. And then so there's that question, but then also, so like, what specifically is the data that folks on our call that people should be looking at really specifically? What's the data? Where do you access it? What are you looking at to determine which students actually are in most need of a tutor, and then make sure they don't get looked over?
Thanks. For the first part of that question is great, because we have seen just a ridiculous number of kids who have been lost. They were disengaged from the systems. We're not sure where they are right now, although I tend to believe it is the groups closest to the ground that actually do know where a lot of those students are. They may not be in the school building, but they may be, playing basketball at the Boys and Girls Club. And so I, really press on folks to think about that community school integration, where you'll be able to find a lot of those kids and hopefully bring them back in. The other thing that we've learned, and it probably, shocking to some, I think a lot of the folks on this call already knew this, but the pandemic really elevated the intersectoral work that we have going on. The fact that when kids were no longer in school, they no longer had access to nutritious meals, that kids experiencing homelessness when they didn't have school meant, the Title I coordinator, the homeless education coordinator may not be able to provide them with the clothes that they need. Like, all of these issues, children experiencing the juvenile justice system, really came to light during the pandemic. All of which is to say, we need to be using all those systems together again to make sure that these kids are not lost, and then we actually can pick them up. And then on the data part, folks, it is heartbreaking to me that for over 20 years now, we've had a federal law in place that said states are supposed to be reporting disaggregated data on student performance. There are actually, if you look at the data quality campaign, I believe their most recent reports that there are only 9 states after 21 years that were actually meeting the letter of the law. So we need to start first there with following some basic requirements, the federal law on what's supposed to be reported, everything from student performance based on race, based on SES, English language learners, and then we can start getting down to information that's produced daily from teachers and students around formative assessments and how students are learning, and also what they're learning, because I'm sure Bob and Kate would say that it's not just the tutor, it's the actual connection to the curriculum. So you're actually helping catch kids up. So those 2 points, I appreciate that question. Thank you, Emily.
Great. Emily, I'm going to jump in and ask Munro. how he thinks about data at the local level. And while Munro's gathering his thoughts, which doesn't take long, you saw that the poll came up, which means we have about 10 minutes to go, but would really love your input on what you liked and what you'd like to see more of. So please fill out that poll while you hear what Munro has to say about data at the local level.
Yeah,
I know how focused you are on this. I know that I mean I just stuck a quarter in exactly the right slot. So tell us how you think about this.
Well, I agree with everything Denise is talking about, and you know, we're and our team at Reach Charlotte, we're big believers in improvement science, and one of the core tenets is variation in outcomes is the key problem to solve. And so, if you don't have disaggregated data, you can't see what the variations are, and you don't have a good perspective. But really quickly, when we think about data, we think it has three basic functions, and that's what we try to do internally and help our partners around. The first one is insights. So, you know, what insights does data give you? The second, what can we learn from the data to sort of inform our work? And then finally, action. How can data help us take action, particularly around continuous improvement? Oftentimes we limit and have a very flat view around data. We think, oh, it's just pre and post tests. It's just about reporting on outcomes. But actually, we think that data should really be the lifeblood of a high performing organization and your work. And then we think about this in terms of tutoring improvement cycles during a school year. We want 6 to 8 week improvement cycles. How are our kids doing? What kind of adjustments do we need to make? Are we seeing, you know, do our tutors, you know, have what they need? I couldn't agree more with what David said around tutors are more effective when they feel like they're effective and they know the materials and they know what they're doing. Data is, we really think about how do we go from data to insights, right, to action. And so you can't do that. You're just throwing things on the wall and hoping something sticks if you don't have the right kind of information. Data is critical.
Bob and Kate, I hope you're taking notes on that, because that was awesome between what Denise and Munro just said. And I know you guys have got a million things to do to get this whole business launched. But those insights, I think, are critical to the question of quality for this whole venture. Go ahead, Emily.
I know. I mean, so just to again say to everybody, so many good questions. We're not going to have time to get to all of them, but that's why we're saying Q&A box. They're all here organized, so we will make sure that they get sent on. But there's several questions, and again, I'm kind of just summarizing and paraphrasing, but several questions about, you know, how is this really going to work for the schools? Because they're already overstressed, they're already getting a million other things thrown at them, they're already freaking out, they can't spend all this AARP money. People are telling them different things about where to spend it. How can we assume that this is not just going to be another organization coming in to say, here we are to help you, or here's the federal government saying this is something you should do. Like, so Kate and Bob, I mean, I guess this is really more for you, is how are you factoring all that in? How is that going to work? How is that going to work, especially when you're talking about and there's been a lot of comments about this too, that there are these local nonprofit tutoring programs that do great work, but they have a hard time getting the reaction or getting the attention of the school district. So
yep.
There we go. So there's the big question. So how are you factoring that in?
And Liz and Munro, love to hear your reaction to what Bob and Kate have to say about this, about how this feels at the local level. Go ahead, Bob.
So that's one reason why we're really stressing the importance of this role. We're calling this the local organizing partner that can help be the bridge between the school district and the local sort of student support providing organizations. And that can be, you know, that can be a nonprofit, that can be a community group. There could be different people who could play that role. It could be United Way. It depends on who in each community. There's usually different folks that can play that role. We're really trying to elevate that and identify that as a corner connecting piece. We did a lot of focus groups with principals on things like about tutoring and mentoring. What almost all of them said is that we believe in it, and we really tried to do it with our own staff because they know our kids, we know them, they know the culture of the school. It's the best way to go. And we couldn't pull it off because even paying them more money or more time, they were just too overwhelmed. They couldn't do it. And at that point, they just sort of threw their hands up out of frustration. And we said, well, what about community partners? And many of them then had one bad experience sometime in their career. Over a 25 career, They might have had 10 good experiences, but the one bad one sticks in their mind as a lot of sunk cost and a lot of effort that didn't go anywhere. So they were hesitant on their own, and they didn't have a relationship to go out and seek those community partners. And at the same time, as you said, many community partners struggle to get into school. So that's why we really recognize this local brokering role for people that know the communities is so essential, because that's got to be sort of the center local tent pole of bringing those two groups together. And first, like, our belief is, and we're going to try to do this by, some national like noise about this to try to get people to get, help get them organized locally. But first, they just got to get to know each other. Like, before we start trying to say, let's do a local, partnership for student success, first get to know each other, figure out how you can help each other, and then let's come together to try to figure out how we can do this, a local version of this.
Liz, how does that land with you?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. We've struggled. We started as a summer program, but the intention was always to get into the schools. And there's over 600 districts in New Jersey. And so going district by district, not to mention school by school, is a huge issue. We just recently did get some state funding to get into the schools and do some tutoring during the school day. What we found is we had to make it as easy and as clear as possible when going to the school. So making it easy, we're bringing the tutors in, we're bringing a site coordinator in to address any issues that happen, that pop up, any materials issues, any behavioral issues, and then also very clear, even in like a one-page chart form, not just ESSER funds, but other funds that they may be able to tap into that can be used for this program. And we've had some success, but it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of time. But it's I agree with Bob, kind of the only way to do it.
Great. Emily, do you have time for one more?
Right, and so I know you've all touched on this a little bit, but we'd like to lift up again how. Well, actually, I guess I'm getting a two-part question, but like when you see this rolling out, how are parents going to be engaged? How are you going to consider what they want, what they need, when they can get their kids to tutoring, the before school, after school thing, and then also, when we think about like, here's the educator with a class full of kids, what's their role going to be in making sure that this NPSS rolls out? So parents and educators.
Yeah,
Bob, go ahead, Kate. Go ahead, Kate.
And I think this comes back to what we've discussed a lot today around this really needs to be customized to what each individual community wants and needs. As Munro said before, we should absolutely not be recreating the wheel. In most cases, there's the bulk of what we're doing, could be replicated or could be learned from. But the pieces on the side about how can parents decide if they're doing it during the school day or during the after school time, or how are we engaging youth to provide input on what the program looks like, things like that. I think there are great models for what works in both of those areas around youth engagement, youth voice and choice, and around parent engagement. But I do think there isn't going to be one model that works for every community on how to best allow parents to choose which services to opt in and opt out. And I did see in the Q&A, it's, how do you weigh the pros and cons of in-school support versus out-of-school support, which is preferable here. There are pros and cons. And I think in this case, it's another both and. This is a situation that in some contexts, the out-of-school context is going to be what works because maybe you have the staffing and you have the space. And in the other school context, it's going to be the in-school kind of embedded tutoring that is more advantageous. And I know that's not the clearest answer, but I do think it's going to vary from community to community.
And you're going to need both to get to all kids.
Yep.
Well, let me see. So I think, Munro, it was you that talked about the issue of federal procurement and funding tutoring. So if you could say, we've got literally 60 seconds.
Yeah, so I'll do it in 60 seconds. I think as MPSS goes forward, any work that can be done with the U.S. Department of Ed to provide as much flexibility as possible within the framework of accountability for public funds, I think would be critically important. What I'm seeing play out on the local level is, districts interested in supporting tutoring, but saying they have to follow federal procurement rules. And so what I'm seeing as a barrier for local groups not being able to access dollars. So that's one thing. And it really moving into a vendor relationship as opposed to a partnership relationship. The other side of that in the last 20 seconds is, I believe because of the way that it's structured, and my understanding is this may be due to the federal sort of rules that they're trying to follow, that if it's structured as a fee for service sort of model where you get paid for the tutoring that you provide, you're effectively asking the community-based groups to cash flow the expansion of tutoring up front and then get paid on the back end, net 30, net 45. And so I think that is a policy issue, that if tutoring is a national strategy, then we need to make sure that our sort of policies around the use of those funds follow that, so that the dollars actually flow out to community groups the way that it's intended.
Fantastic. Wow, what a conversation. We could go on. And we will, in a sense, because Bob and Kate have promised that they would respond to questions that we didn't get to, and really appreciate the input from everybody and the amount of engagement in this conversation. Once again, I want to thank Emily and Sierra, who make these things happen and make them happen so seamlessly. And I want to thank our fantastic panel today. Everybody was great. We could hear more and more from all of you. A reminder that we'll be revisiting these issues around human capital when we talk about Engage Every Student on October 11th. And on the screen right now, there's a little list of what's coming up in the next few weeks. So again, thanks to everybody, and a good day, and a big appreciation all around.
Thank you.
You all, everybody.